Happy Saturday and welcome to the deal. I'm your host, Ed Clark. It is Saturday, March 27th, 2021, another wild week in America. I get up every morning and I start to think, I'm either in Groundhog Day because it seems the same regardless of who's in DC or whatever. The COVID-19 has totally permeated our lives. But sometimes I think I'm in a time warp because we're talking about Jim Crow voting laws in Georgia as if we were back in the 60s. And then I, I just cannot get over where we are on the border situation. That doesn't seem to have improved. So there's a whole bunch to talk about today, and I'm not going to waste any time. I have a reliable panel in here. We have, as we always do, Val Atkinson, host of Connections on Foxy 107, 104 here in Raleigh, author, former professor at North Carolina Central University in political science. And Dr. Felecia Harris is back. Hey, doctor.
Hey, good morning, everybody.
Dr. Felecia Harris from UNC Charlotte. Um, and let me get this right. So I'll let you tell it, Felicia. Which department are you in now, and what are you focusing on?
I'm in women's and gender studies, and I'm cross-listed with women's and gender studies and Africana studies with focus on African American studies and women's studies, and pop culture.
That's a mouthful. That's a lot.
That is.
So welcome back, Dr. McFarland. Still dealing with some issues, so we're gonna work to get her back in here with us as soon as possible. Today, what we want to deal with is a lot of issues, and chief among them is I want to start with the COVID situation right now. COVID-19, we know that a lot of people are being vaccinated. This week, the president announced that now his goal is 200 million people or 200 million vaccines administered in the first 100 days. As of this morning, I'm looking at the number right now, 130,474,853 as of this morning doses administered. Fully vaccinated people is only 46 million though, which is problematic. So I'm going to come back to my panel here, and I'm going to start with you, Val. 130 million vaccine dosages have been put out. 46 million people are fully vaccinated, of which you are one. Dr. Harris is one, and I'm almost there. I got 10 more days before I get my second dose of Moderna. Why are we still creeping along? The supply is definitely out there. President Biden has said that he's going to, go for this 200 million doses administered. Where's the disconnect here? I need for people to get vaccinated. I'm tired of people dying. I want to talk about that too in a minute. But why are we still having a hard time here, Val?
Well, we're having a hard time, Ed, because we're trying to adjust to a new system. Initially, the previous administration wanted to lay this in the lap of the states. They wanted to make sure corporations in the private sector were in a position to make money, that they could do all they wanted to do. But when it really came down to the administration and the logistics of the issue, he wanted the states to be involved in that. Now we have a new administration who's saying the federal government has a role to play. We are going to get whomever involved that we think will be good and necessary to make this happen. So we're going through a transition period. And to be where we are with 46 million fully vaccinated and many, many more on the way to being that, I think it's a plus. I think we're doing very well. As a matter of fact, Biden got on television and talked about he exceeded his 100 million people within his first 100 days by far. And he needed to brag about that. We just need to keep up the pressure. And I think that's an individual thing, Ed. I think each one of us need, especially those of us who've already been fully vaccinated, need to be talking to those people out there who haven't or who are afraid or who have concerns. We need to say, hey, I'm fully vaccinated, man. Hey, look at me. I'm okay. Let's go do it. Let's make it happen.
Well, that's questionable because, yeah, I'm okay. It did not bother me at all. And Dr. Harris, I'm gonna bring you in here because you're fully vaccinated. But I want to talk to you about the setting that you work in. You teach at the college level, and you probably saw those pictures of those young folks on spring break in Florida acting a fool. And you've seen what's happened at Duke University where they had to close down and the basketball team had to shut down. You've seen what happened at our old school at UNC Chapel Hill earlier in the year when students would not cooperate and they had to shut down dorms and such. What's the situation at UNC Charlotte? And also what do you see, being around young people? Are they taking this as serious as they should? And what other measures do you think should happen in those kind of settings?
So at UNC Charlotte, right now we are both virtual as well as we have high priority classes where students are able to be in more of a face-to-face environment. Some of our chemistry classes, our biology, some of our graduate classes as well. And at least in the communications I've had, because my classes are still 100% virtual, I am sharing the message, with my students. So when I got vaccinated 2 weeks, I think it's been 2 weeks ago at Johnson C. Smith University, and I did the Johnson and Johnson vaccine, which was a one shot, and for them to hear me, someone they've been around, of course, for this semester, and many of them I've had over the semesters, to hear me talk about it, I think it allowed for them to really understand the importance of being safe, the importance of something as simple as taking a flu shot. I always get the flu shot because I'm in a high contact environment. So, and students get sick, just like in many settings. So I do think having voices like ours and like mine saying it to them, yes, you can take the shot. Yes, you're going to be safe. No, I had no side effects at all, other than, just the normal, you get a shot and I can't stand to take shots kind of response. But other than that, um, any of the symptoms that they say you might have, I haven't had any. And, because my 95-year-old grandmother took the shot, my almost 80-year-old mom took the shot. I think the more stories that we hear, and they hear, excuse me, that they hear. And at first, my 21-year-old was like, oh, I don't know about the shot. It's going to do this. But then once I got it, and then my husband, Ken, just got it yesterday. She signed up for a shot just that quick. So I think having the positive conversations around it in the midst of still some of the confusion that's out there, around the different types of shots by the different types of companies, that still sparks people back to Tuskegee. So when I was listening to all of the, media out this week about the viability of the different types of shots from different, first thing that popped in my head was Tuskegee, and people still remembering and being, a little hesitant, to take that step. And, so
Yeah.
the more positive we can get out to the young people, I know me sharing as soon as I got mine with them that Monday, I know it changed some of my students' thoughts about maybe it's okay. Dr. Harris got it. Well, it's okay.
Yeah, and you look like you're doing fine to me. So I want to remind you, you're watching The Deal. That's Dr. Felecia Harris, and that's Val Atkison, former professor at North Carolina Central University, Department of Political Science. Val, part of this is still political, though, right? You mentioned the fact that the last administration did not do such a good job at the whole response, right? And trying to convince people that this taking a shot or wearing a mask or whatever is not political. I did see some statistics, and it said that a lot of the majority of white men, Republican white men, said they were not going to get it. What does that say about how Donald Trump, and I won't even say Donald Trump, I don't want to mischaracterize this, but how white men seem to not want to cooperate on anything right now. They don't want to be full participants in democracy. They're trying to ruin voting, and we're going to talk about that later. They're participating in mass killings. They're doing insurrections. They belong to these supremacist groups. Why does white nationalism cross over into this? Whether or not people are getting vaccinated or not.
It's a holistic approach, Ed. Once they take that red pill, they are sworn enemies of anything that the Democratic Party, supported by progressives and liberals, that they feel good about. So you name the item or the issue that liberals and progressives support, these white nationalists, white men, Republicans, they almost have to be against that. And that's why they take the positions they take. It's unfortunate because a lot of it has to do with taking positions that are directly against their personal self-interest, but they take them anyway to show their allegiance to the cause, their cause of being against what they call taking away or destroying the culture, cancel culture.
Yeah, yeah, this whole cancel culture nonsense that I've been hearing a lot about. Dr. Harris, now all of a sudden, all of these white men are really touchy feely about their feelings that they said they're being canceled, but they're on TV still talking about whatever they want to talk about. I know you teach in the Africana Studies area. What is it with you think? Are they just afraid that they're being surpassed and they're trying to double down and they can't agree about anything? Or what? And then what do your students? I mean, what do your students think about where their place is in America with white people cutting up like they are? Because I know we're at that age where we were the first kids who were in fully integrated settings in the schools and stuff like that. And we're not that old. I don't consider ourselves to be that old. But when we were going to kindergarten, first grade, we were probably the first kids that were in a fully integrated setting. And so these other kids haven't known anything else, but we're talking about still issues about voting rights. Do those kids ever say anything that you deal with? Are they aware of how dire the situation is?
Well, and one of the things that we have been covering, we just finished Black History Month and we're in Women's History Month, but we were talking about this week, we actually were talking about white privilege and, and conversations around, what that is, what that system is. And so if you are, in a system of white privilege within our institutional, racism and white supremacy, then anything that is not for you is seen as then, a threat against you, like cancel culture. And what's interesting that I found in having talked about white privilege in the context of, I'm talking about it in several classes right now, is this notion of non-belief. I had one white male in one of my classes just arguing down that, well, no, he didn't have white privilege. And I said, well, unless someone actually explains it to you in a very basic, simple way, things that you get that you don't earn. You get, and a great example is my husband and I were talking about this whole situation that just happened in Colorado, and we were talking about mass school shootings in one of my classes, and then we've had two of these massacres within a week. And I was struck by the image of the individual in Colorado, and the police were walking him, even though he's of Muslim background, I'm sure. But if you're looking at him aesthetically and not digging a little bit further, one would think, oh, well, that's a white male. but we were struck by the police actually wounding him in the leg. He was able to walk and walking him out of the grocery store. And the example I gave to my students were, now, if that had been someone with my level of melanin, what do you think? Would he be walking out of the grocery store? So this whole idea of white privilege and explaining it in such a way that students who've lived it that don't get it is giving them example after example, and that has helped. I know in terms of the students I know that has helped them understand this system is here. No one in my family has said, James, you have white privilege, and because you have white privilege, this is what you get to do. And I mean explicitly in that way, because you're going to do it in that, family sphere, your environment, etc. You get to do those things anyway without thinking about it. It's only when you feel like your access is somewhat cut off, then you have an insurrection, or you have a Dylan Roof who can shoot up people in a Bible study, and the police takes you to go to Burger King because you're hungry, and they put a bulletproof vest on you. So what we're now seeing is just a cycle of this notion of white privilege. And so if we can't get who we want in office, okay, we're gonna, do something with voting rights. Just talk about it.
Yeah, yeah, and you got us right up to the break, Dr. Harris. We're going to take a break, and we'll come back. We're going to talk about voting rights because that's the extension of this of this conversation, right? We've talked about it, what's going on in Georgia, and we're going to get in depth to it. So stay right there. We'll be back in a minute. You're watching The Deal. And welcome back to The Deal. This is our second segment. That's Dr. Felecia Harris, and that's Dr. Val Atkison. And I'm me. I'm Ed Clark. We're here trying to make sense of the world like we do every Saturday, and we're talking about a bunch of stuff. We led off with COVID, Dr. Harris. I'm hopeful, right? I've been vaccinated, you've been vaccinated, Val's been vaccinated. A lot of people that we know have. We got to get more people, but now we still have this issue that's permeated this country from day one. Black people could not vote at the beginning. Black people weren't citizens, and then we became citizens, and then they immediately tried to strip the vote away, and that's been an ongoing problem. And in Georgia, in the last few days, they passed a law that one of the provisions is, Dr. Harris, you can't even give out water to somebody standing in line. Let's start with you. How do we get around some of these draconian measures? Because I'll presume that they'll end up in the Supreme Court, and I'll talk to you about that, Val, a little bit later. But how do you get around some of the things they're trying to do now, Dr. Harris? There's hot days in Georgia where people are going to have to stand in line, and every time I see Georgia votes, there's a lot of people standing in a lot of long lines. What's going to happen there?
I remember, and it probably was, yeah, I guess it was last year, and I was in Atlanta, outside of Atlanta, in Jonesboro, where my sister lives, and I remember when they were talking about the special election, and I remember how hot it was that particular day, and I was saying to her, you may want to go a little bit earlier where it's cooler. But I think I saw Stacey Abrams, and it may have been, a couple of other public figures. I think it was Mayor Keisha Lance Bottom also talking about, it appears these laws are going to be put in place, but the thing that we can remember is it doesn't prevent us from coalescing in a different way. So if they're telling us these things, which we know are voter suppression, they're telling us these things, then that means we need to, as we've done in the past, change our methodology. So if you can't have water, people bring you water and you're standing in line for 4 hours. Well, when you exit your car, there are people giving you a backpack with, enough water for 3 or 4 hours, a snack or some food. Oh, you need a chair because you didn't bring a chair. If you have to sit, then we have extra chairs. So I think we shift our methodology in the process of things going through the legal system, because they're not gonna, for me, if we're talking about going back to what the first voting rights amendment back in 1860, the 15th Amendment, and we're still in 2020 having these same conversations, then we have to get 2020 creative in how we manage getting people to the polls, people being able to vote safely and not, get sick or, other things with some of these, again, policies that are explicitly designed to keep groups of color in the periphery not to vote.
Yeah, Val, we saw the image coming back in from the break of the state legislator being hauled away, to jail for knocking on the governor's door. It's clear that she's a state representative. There's other state representatives with her. It's just reminiscent of the kind of treatment and tactics that happened in the 40s, 50s, 60s, leading up to us being able to get a person like Raphael Warnock elected in Georgia. It's clear that the state troopers that were standing there, just his demeanor just kind of struck me as just reminiscent of something that would have happened in the 1960s. When you see that video, what does that make you think of? And then how do we wind this to the Supreme Court to get a fair hearing with Brett Kavanaugh and Neil Gorsuch and Clarence Thomas and people like that on the court? I know that's a long way to get to solving a problem, but isn't it going to have to touch the Supreme Court at some point? And then if it does, what kind of chance do we have with a court with the balance that it has?
Well, it's going to be very difficult, but let's talk about how it gets to that point. There's a bill in the Senate right now that was originated in the House that addresses it, the John Lewis voting rights bill, that would really eliminate or make null and void all those things that Georgia wants to do. Now, first of all, we've got to get that passed. And if we do, that will be monumental. Well, first of all, we've got to consider, even before the filibuster, we've got to consider Joe Manchin, because he, without any Republican help, could derail any chances that we have of passing the John Lewis Voting Rights Act. So if we got him on board, then we've got to worry about, because this is not a reconciliation piece, we've got to worry about changing Senate Rule 22 so that we can bring about cloture, so that we can cut off debate, so that 50 senators plus Kamala Harris can pass the Senate version of the John Lewis voting rights bill. Okay, that's just step two. And then even if that passes, the Republicans are going to wait until you try to implement that law. They're going to file a lawsuit that will probably get through the district and the circuit courts, but on its way to the Supreme Court. Now that brings about your telltale question, Ed. What are we going to do with the 6-3 conservative majority on the courts? And that's the $64,000 question. Right now, we're in trouble when it comes to that. And it reminds me of some of the decisions that conservative courts have made in the past. They won't come right out and say that, okay, everything about the John Lewis Voting Rights Act is wrong, or everything about the Georgia voter suppression piece is right. They'll say, we will agree that you can give water to people because that's okay. But all of those other things will stand. Republicans always put stuff in bills that you can challenge, that you're going to get emotionally concerned about, so that they can give that back to you and say, okay, we're compromising. We'll give you the water thing, okay? I ain't falling for it. I'm not falling for that again, because that's what this water thing is about. Come on, guys, get off of it. That's something for you to take in terms of their willingness to compromise. And then they're going to ask you, well, what are you going to do now? I've given up the water piece.
Yeah, they're all very slick at doing stuff like that. I want to remind you guys that you're watching The Deal or you're listening to it on the podcast. One or the other, Dr. Felecia Harris is in with us. That's Val Atkison you just heard. We're talking about the reversal of voting rights in the United States. I wrote a piece last week about Senator Raphael Warnock and his Jim Crow 2.0 speech that he gave in the Senate. So I ask you guys, if you haven't read it already, go and read that. Dr. Harris, I'm intrigued by what you were saying before about, we doing things a different way, right, to get around this. Black folks are resourceful. No matter what they've tried to do, the Black folks over the 400 years we've been here, we've managed to have our own churches, our own institutions, our own economy, despite the fact that, they've tried to do otherwise. I know one of the conversations that we've had before, again, is about this notion of white men not wanting to share anything, that it's absolute power for them, and everything about them culturally is what America is supposed to be, as opposed to the fact that everybody showed up here on the boat except for the people that were already here, and we killed most of those folks, the Native Americans. In thinking about this in terms of the Africana studies that you teach and that kind of thing, in trying to convey to people, like you said, that privilege isn't always something that your parents tell you have, but it's something that you get and you just don't recognize. Talk to me about, again, how you approach this with young folks to get the message across. How do you explain that by denying voting, by reducing the hours down to the polls close at 5, how that affects people that have to work? We're fairly lucky because the jobs that we have, we got some leeway in schedule, but other people don't, do they? I mean, you can't have polls just open from 9 to 5. There's a reason why you can't do that. Can you talk to me about sort of, how you explain that to people, that people do work and some people work 2 or 3 jobs and that kind of thing?
Right. So yeah, to break it down, really in a basic level, like you're saying, when you have, those kind of constraints put in place, one of the areas that we've been also talking about, and I've been talking about with my classes, this whole idea of kind of thinking outside of the box. And really, it's not outside of the box. It's us using some of the things that are already here. And we were looking at some materials, and I remember one of the speakers was talking about this whole idea of what we think about something as simple as education. I teach a gender and education class. And so they were making this dichotomy about, white Americans send their kids to school, to particular schools, so that they, either own the business, or you're the CEO, or you're on the board of directors, you're in positions, where you can, affect change in a different way, where we're sending our kids to school just simply for a job. Oh, and I meant to put entrepreneur in that back. And so the way I talk about things like this is, for that age dynamic is, one, why are you in school? And two, how does that translate for others when we're talking about things like voting rights, or we're talking about Roe versus Wade and other things coming up the pipeline, and really rethinking their place, as you're 18, 19, 20, or really rethinking your place. There's nothing wrong with going down the traditional pipeline, but what does that also allow you to do beyond being in a traditional job where you have a boss and you have this and you have that, that then if you need to get off work in time so you can go to the polls, you have the strategy to do it. Or if you do decide you're in a job like that, then figure out what your benefit pattern is, so that if you need days, you're saving those days and not, frivolously taking a day because you just don't feel like going to work that day. If the polls are going to open and you need, that may be a day that you take as a vacation day. So what, I focus on is, what's the positives that they can do, whether they decide to own the company or they're working for the company, because that does affect, how you're able to move about in, this privileged system that we exist in. So, how to navigate just the very simple thing, and then how to take what I'm talking about in my classes. Part of the goal is for you to share it with other people. And I know I have a mixed bag in that class. So it's not just African American students, it's white students, it's other students of color. So you can't say, well, I didn't know. Well, yeah, you did, because, we've gone through the material, you have resources. And so the next step is really when you're in your job or whatever place you're in, to be able to share. So we spend a lot of time talking about sharing the information, and then people still are going to do, what they're going to do. But at least at a basic level, we can start off with information.
Yeah. Yeah, Val, we got a few minutes left before we need to take a second break. But one of the things I've been thinking about is I'm listening to Dr. Harris. We have the opportunity to be entrepreneurs and run our own businesses, do our own thing, make it so that we don't have to, fall under these rules, don't adversely impact us, so on and so forth. But one of the things that I know in that John Lewis Voting Rights Act is that, they're trying to make it more uniform across the country. And then there's also been talk about things like having a holiday for voting, things like that, being, just make it so that people don't have to worry about getting out of work. We have holidays for other stuff. Why is it in this country, in the United States of America, uh, that we make this, it has to be on a Tuesday, it has to be this time in November, uh, and then it has to be all these 50 different rules in 50 different states. But in some states, it's another 100 rules for every county in the state or whatever. What's the reluctance of Americans to have some sort of uniform, universal voting rules that everybody knows? What's that about?
10th Amendment. There's still this thing called states' rights, and they pound that at us at every opportunity. We started that way, and the reason we started that way, people were afraid that some of the slave-holding states wouldn't come over and become a part of the Union if we didn't give them certain types of guarantees that they could still hold on to their slave. So from the beginning, from 1787, when we had the Constitutional Convention, from that day to this day, we've been bending over backwards, trying to mollify the slave-owning states, or then after slavery was over, the conservative states, the rich folks, the 1%ers. That's what America has been trying to do. And they figured out that if they could control who votes and where and when, they could perpetuate this thing called democracy without having the F word in front of it. In this case, I'm talking FAUX. I'm not talking about the other F word, because it would devolve into a faux democracy. And that's where it's going right now if we don't step in and do something about it. And that's what they try to do. They started, Ed, with white male property owners. And it just got to the point with the 25th Amendment, I believe it was, somebody correct me, where we had 18-year-olds to vote, or 26th Amendment, where we had 18-year-olds to vote. And then before that, it was women, and then black males and so. But it never started out and intended for everybody to cast a ballot. Notwithstanding the fact that we go marauding our way around the world, bragging about we're the world's greatest democracy and trying to destroy other forms of government and telling them they should be a democracy like us. And we are not the world's greatest democracy by any stretch of the imagination.
Well, the people know how I feel, so I know that I'm never going to be president of the United States. So if people can go back and play all the video of me all they want to, saying that America is not the greatest democracy in the history of the world. We're nowhere near it. I will argue with you about it, and so I won't drag Dr. Harris and Val down the same rabbit hole as me. They may have ambitions to do something else. I have no ambitions to do that. So I will talk junk until the day I die, which brings us to a good place to take a break. So when we come back, I want to talk about these children at the border. What are we going to do about it? Are the Democrats playing into the Republicans' hands over that? And then whatever else other news we can cover in the last 15 minutes. So we'll be right back after this message.
So it's past midnight. I'm standing on the shore of the Rio Grande. The water is right behind me. I'm down on the Texas border, along with 18 senators. We made the trip to see the crisis that is playing out. We've already gone to detention facilities that are overrun, many of them with families.
And welcome back to our final segment of the deal. It is Saturday, March 27th, 2021. I think it's my age. I swear it was March of 2020 just yesterday. I mean, I don't remember what's happened with the whole last year. It just seems to be flying by, but I'm glad I have two of my oldest friends on here, Val Atkison and Dr. Felecia Harris, two people who know a lot more than me about stuff. So that's why I have these people around to answer questions that I ask. And so in the lead in coming back from the break, you saw a video of Senator Ted Cruz, who may be the most odious person in the world, at least to me. I don't like him. I will say that up front. I think he's a liar. I don't understand why a man would let another man call his wife ugly and say that his father killed the President Kennedy, and then still pretend like you love Donald Trump so much to the point that you would make yourself look stupid. Uh, he also took the trip to Cancun, which was, not not something I wouldn't expect from him. But this is a new low, Dr. Harris. He's standing at the border pretending like he cares about these children when the conditions under Donald Trump were much worse. Uh, let's talk about immigration broadly. I've talked my junk about Ted Cruz, but I don't know. You may encounter kids that are dreamers, trying to get through college and just trying to make a way for themselves, and they came to America because it was dangerous from where they were from. Uh, but this is the reality. You teach history. None of us were here to begin with. That a whole bunch of white folks showed up on boats and just took over. And so now they don't want to let anybody else in. Uh, I guess I just want you to speak for yourself. But if you think about the fact that everybody else has been able to come that are white from Europe or whatever, but when it's anybody else coming, there's a problem with that. Talk to me about, immigrant kids coming in, and in this case, there are a number of children at the border who are unaccompanied. What would you do about that? How do we get ourselves out of this? The numbers to me are manageable. You can do something about it. They say there's anywhere from 15 to 20,000 kids. There's 300 million people in the United States, so 20,000 people isn't a lot to me. Or am I looking at this wrong?
Well, and we actually were talking about this this past week, because I do have some students, who came here with parents. They're dreamers, and because of course I'm in Africana Studies, I've had a different perspective on all of this. I agree with you. The numbers. I mean, we know what the mass media is in terms of how our information gets filtered. We know, of course, sound bites that we're going to get, from the Ted Cruzes of the world. And I remind students, if we just take a minute back, just go back in history for a minute, the only people who were here, before anybody else were who? We're talking about the Native Americans, not Columbus discovered America. He just was able to locate it without GPS. Okay. So when we talk about what's going on now, it is interesting, the focus, of course, on peripheral or, people of color. And when we go back and look at, immigration over the years, we would not be America without immigrants. We definitely would not be America without the forced immigration of Africans. So to be in 2020, it reminded me of one of my Asian American students was saying it reminded them of the tenement camps that they had for Asian Americans, coming who were here. So I agree with Val in that there is this whole paradox, and a paradox in a political moment. Instead of thinking about what are some strategic ways, to handle immigration, because it is what made America America, and without that melting pot, we would not be who we are.
Yeah.
And not everybody wants to accept that fact.
Yeah, you're watching the deal. That's Dr. Felecia Harris and Val. I feel like the Democrats may be missing an opportunity here. One, to come up with a quick solution to get, like Dr. Harris said, the mass media from telling this story about the border crisis. The fact is that people have been showing up at the border in those same kind of numbers. I wouldn't look at the numbers. I mean, there's been periods where there's been more to show up. Is it problematic? Yes, it is. But one of the reasons why these folks come here is because they get jobs working for the very same people who get the tax breaks that run larger companies and construction and all that other stuff. I'm not hiring any illegal immigrants, Val. I don't think you are either, or Dr. Harris. So why do people like Ted Cruz get up there and act outraged when they're the very ones who use this immigrant labor? I don't hire them. Why can't we tell that story? Why don't we just, pull the scab off and say where these people are actually working and who's getting the tax breaks and who's not paying these people a decent wage?
Well, I'm with you, Ed. I think personally that that's what we should be doing. I think one of the reasons that they are not doing it is because they don't think it'll work. They think it'll fall on deaf ears. All of the people that think it's a good idea already are on the side that don't hire illegal aliens to work. So, who are they going to try to really bring over or convince? Again, going back to the beginning of this whole piece, I'm looking at a book that I'm about to order. I haven't ordered yet, by William H. Fry. And the title is Diversity Explosion, 2018. And he's talking about a period about 10 years prior to the writing here. So he's talking about when demographers first came up with the prediction that by 2042, whites will be a majority minority. They will no longer be in the majority in this particular country. And Hispanics will be the largest ethnic group outside of whites. And that scared the bejesus out of a lot of people. And a piece of the latest census also says that when you break this down, this projection down by age groups, it's already here. The largest group of young folks in America are Hispanics, followed by white people. I say that again, the largest group of young folks between the ages of 10 and 29 are Hispanics. So that is scaring these people. So what do you do about it? You make it more difficult for Hispanics to come into this country. You set up things at the border, you build a wall. You do whatever is necessary. You make sure dreamers don't get what they want. You stop that from coming in, and maybe you can help. Your real problem, the real malaise, is that white folks aren't procreating in a fast number, and they are dying quicker than they are procreating. This is causing the problem. So they know that, you talk about 2042. They run the numbers out to 2060 and it's dire. It is much worse then. And then it gets worse as it goes forward. So this is what they're looking at. And they're saying, if we don't do something drastic right now, we lose what we are calling Americana. We can't let this thing go on. There is no physical possible way we can win. You're talking about winning elections. We can't even hold on to our own culture. We can't do it, so let's pull out all the stops. I ain't worried about pulling out the stops or getting the genie back in the bottle. Just pull out the stop. Yeah. And we have got to understand it from that perspective, Ed. If we have got to stop trying to figure out this as a math problem, as a logical problem, that people that are sensible and reasonable will see that this is better than that we're not dealing with reasonable, sensible people, okay? So we've got to think, as Felecia was saying, outside of the box to come up with understanding that the normal way we approach these problems when we're dealing with an adversary doesn't work with these people. They see this as a life and death struggle as far as their culture is concerned. And until we look at it that way also, we won't be able to come up with a strategy as to how we can deal with these people. We are dealing with a 1950s, 60s, and 70s strategies. These people are thinking 2042 and beyond.
Yeah, you're definitely right, Val, and Dr. Harris. You know, we're going to run out of time. It gets too many issues to talk about. One other thing I just want to mention as a programming note, Thomas McLaurin from the George Floyd Memorial Center will be back on here with us. I'm hoping he'll be back on next week with a big announcement. It should take place this week about a training program that the George Floyd Center is doing to try to get 1,000 rural Black folks trained to do IT jobs. So that announcement should be coming up. So we're going to try to get Thomas McLaurin back on here in the coming weeks to talk about that because that's near and dear to my heart. As an IT professional for the last 30 years, my goal has been to get more African Americans involved in the industry because not only does it pay well, I think it's a good job. And it doesn't matter what color you are. If you do the work and know how to do advanced technology, people will pay for it. Trust me, the one of the richest people in IT is a guy named Dave Stewart, who happens to be the guy who owns the company that I work for during the day, who's a billionaire that nobody knows, and he's Black. And one of the richest people in technology and IT. Everybody talks about Bill Gates and all those folks all the time, but Dave Stewart is a person you need to know, who's the richest, actually the real richest Black man in America that nobody knows. So we'll talk about that with Thomas McLaurin hopefully next week. In the time we got left here, Dr. Harris, as I hear you and Val talk about, developing new strategies, not being bogged down in their nonsense and BS that the other side, is perpetuating. I'm still afraid though, because gun culture is crazy. And you alluded to it earlier, Dr. Harris, about the shootings in Atlanta and then the one in Boulder. We just don't know. Well, obviously the person has mental health issues, but regardless, it's too easy to get a gun in America. And it doesn't seem like we're ever going to do anything about it. You can kill a bunch of kindergartners and the Republicans still don't want to do gun control. Uh, and you guys had that shooting at UNC Charlotte. And so I was thinking about that when you were talking earlier. Has that changed people thinking around UNC Charlotte? Around. I mean, were there any discussions about guns and the fear of what could happen on campus?
So that would have been two 2 years ago this time. So that would have been
Mhm.
March, April 2019. And actually we were, like I said, we were talking about violence in schools the last couple of weeks. And I did talk about some of the students that are in my classes now, that, were sophomores or even freshmen or, juniors and seniors now, and they remembered. So I did do a disclaimer, because with any kind of school shooting, people are going to have some residuals. So what we did on campus was, not only did we not go back, we didn't go back for the rest of the semester that happened. Um, and we had programs. One of our Office of Psychological Services, Mental Health, did trainings with staff, faculty. Then we were able to deliver those with students. There were student facilitators. They We did a memorial. So it used to be a tower in the center of kind of main campus, and now there's a memorial right there in front of the building, Kennedy Hall, where the shooting actually happened. I think I didn't go back to campus, so that happened that year, April, May, and I didn't go back to campus until actually the next academic year, because the building where the shooting happened was in maybe 10 feet of the building where my office is. So when I walk out the door, Kennedy Hall is right there, So it even took me a moment to feel safe, because, like a lot of college campuses, think what 3 or 4 years ago was Virginia Tech. We were in class when that happened, and it popped on my phone. There's a active shooter at Virginia Tech, in the midst of me teaching. So having, I know we put some other protocols in on campus for safety, because we are open campus. So anyone can pretty much drive up on campus. And now that we have our train system that you can take the train and it'll drop you right off on campus. Now you have that. So we have multiple levels of surveillance and security that we now have enhanced to help that. But even still, I'm in a classroom with three cement walls and two doors, and an active shooter comes into class. What do?
Yeah, yeah. Well, the gun culture in America is bananas to me. I own guns. I shoot. I grew up in the country. I know how to kill stuff. So, to eat. But being able to buy assault weapons and walk into a massage parlor a few hours later and kill people, or buy an assault pistol and 5 days later walk into a supermarket and kill people. It's too easy in America. I don't care what people say. We can deal with the Second Amendment in another show. But as we get ready to get out of here today, what are your last thoughts on uh, any impetus at all to do anything about gun reform? We've already talked about this very slim majority that the Democrats have. We already talked about your new buddy, Joe Manchin, because you had to move on from Mitch McConnell, and Joe Manchin seems to be the holdup now. How many people got to get killed? Do we have to have a mass shooting with hundreds of people, or even that won't move the needle?
Well, I'm going to tell you a very short story to sum up my position on this. I belong to a golf club called the Hackers, and we go to the beach every year. It's an all African American club. We don't discriminate. If white folks want to join, they can, but we just happen not to have any. But we invited one this last time, a Caucasian fella, to participate with us. And when we were sitting around just talking, playing cards and having libations, we were talking politics. And he said he had an answer to the gun problem in America. This is a white guy. He said every organized group, from fraternities and sororities to political action groups or whatever, should go down and start having their individual members buy weapons and register and have concealed carry permits. If Black people in enough volume start buying weapons and asking to purchase weapons, you would see weapons and all kinds of other kind of regulation to stop this. They did it back in the 60s when the Black Panthers started carrying open weapons, and it was legal in Oakland, California at that time to do so. They passed laws to say, nope, you can't carry open loaded guns anymore, effective immediately. Okay? So it's almost a tongue-in-cheek kind of example, and I don't think it will happen, and because it's not very realistic, but it goes to show where they are and where we are. I don't think we're going to talk these guys out of having their guns. The Proud Boys, the Boogaloo Boys, the Wolverines, and the Oath Keepers, all of those white supremacist, white nationalist groups, they are going to have their guns regardless, because they really believe, Ed, that some kind of way there still could be an Indian uprising or a slave revolt. They really believe that in some kind of way, so they got to be prepared.
Well, they're scared of Negroes, and I think that's what it is. They want guns to shoot Negroes,
Sure.
so that's where we are. Well, shoot, man, we're about to run out of time. So, as we always do before we leave, I always ask our panel, what do we have to look forward to in the coming week? Something good, or just something we need to know about? So I'll start with you, Dr. Harris. Anything coming up in the coming week we need to look forward to, or anything good you got to tell us? Because we always talk about such bad news on here.
Oh my goodness. You didn't tell. Look, I've had all the destruction in my mind right now. So let's see what's coming down the pipeline that's good. Well, we're finishing actually Women's History Month. And we've just been fortunate to in my classes to go over some wonderful women. I'm always encouraged when I can share information, with my students and with others of things that we were not taught. And there's a lot out there that we were not taught, that we didn't know, that once you do a little bit of digging, you can find out. So, I look forward to finishing up this month with Women's History Month, and really Women's History Month and African American history and other history, for the rest of the year. And we're just not relegated, to a month,
Right.
some kind of history.
Well, see, that's a good one. There you go. And Val Atkinson, tell me something good we need to know, or something that you've been thinking about for the upcoming week.
Well, we still got to talk about connections. We won't be on this coming Sunday, but the following Sunday, we're going to have a very special guest, and I'm not at liberty to share that with you. This is not just a tease, but it's a very, very special guest. And I encourage my listenership to tune in Sunday after this, coming at 8 a.m. For a special edition of Connections on WFXC, WFXK, Fox 107, 104. That's 107.1 on your FM dial, or 104.3 on your FM dial.
Well, and I'm sure it'll be a good guest. Val, people know, or like some of the newer people that are coming in that are just catching on to the deal, don't know we've been doing Connections I've been doing it for 20 some years. You've been doing it nearly 30. And we've had everybody from Barack Obama to Wallace Muhammad to all kind of folks as guests
Dr.
on the show.
Barber was a guest on our show on a regular basis.
Yeah. So
Eric Dyson was a
Eric
guest.
Dyson. Yeah. So with the Connections is the place to be. And we're hoping that the deal becomes the place to be. Well, in the coming week for me, make sure you go out to the deal with edclark.com. We always got a new blog post out there. We got links to stuff. You can catch all the past episodes. We've had great guests in the past. We're going to continue to have great guests. I'm working on a guest for next week from the School of Public Health at UNC to talk about disparity in treatment for COVID-19 and disparity in vaccination. So hopefully we will work that out with the School of Public Health here at UNC Chapel Hill. And a lot of the research that came out for the vaccines came out of UNC. So I know Dr. Harris will clap her hands with me on that one. The Tar Heels did it again. The basketball, not so much this year, but that's okay. In the meantime, what I want you to do is go do something good for somebody today. Come back with us next Saturday. You've been watching The Deal. Have a good Saturday. Bye.